I'm kind of a palette junkie. My passion for watercolor spills over into the supplies and tools that you use for painting watercolors, and palettes are one of those things that I just kind of enjoy having and kind of enjoy sort of collecting. Like for instance this one, the little bijou box. I love the way this is so small and fits in your pocket. Of course, my Holbein 250 that I've shown before. It's kind of messy, but that's a favorite of mine. I like the nice small profile of that one. And even my Studio Holbein 1000 palette that has been freshly cleaned and freshly filled with Daniel Smith watercolors. But my favorite palette is what's in this bag, and that's what I'm going to show you today. So stay tuned. Hey everyone, this is what I want to show you today. What this is a Roberson Style palette made by Brass Palette India, which is a company or a guy who makes these Roberson Style brass palettes and quite a few other palettes. His name is Venu, and he just does terrific work. So this is, like I said, a Roberson Style palette. And what a Roberson palette is it's actually a style of palette that's been around for a long time. A company in England named Roberson started making watercolor supplies in the early 1800s and made them all the way up until the mid-80s. And they actually made theirs of steel, and it was a little different than these. It had a thumb hole for your thumb. And since they were made of steel, they tended to rust. And I would imagine most of them out there have kind of rusted away. There are probably some still in use, but they're probably not in great shape, as you probably saw from the photo that I show there. I'm a little surprised there isn't a manufacturer making these today. They're very popular, and there's only about 5 or 6 people handcrafting these, making these by hand in the world today. So anyway, what this is a box, again, made by Brass Palette India, and it's made of solid brass. Everything from the thumb ring to the hinge pieces, everything's made of brass. It opens like this. And the Brass Palette India version actually has these little tabs, see here, that make it helpful for opening these flaps. Inside you have your color wells, and this well unit here is actually made of brass as well. This is all handmade, like I said, all painted. And paint doesn't stick to brass, and so there's a process painting these that involves etching the brass before paint will stick to it. So there's a lot that goes into making these. A lot of hand folding of things and pressing of things and welding things. So there's a lot of work that goes into these. This one has a thumb ring. My thumb's a little too big to fit in it. But it works actually great with your finger, like this, and that way, when you're using it, you can hold it in your hand like this. Now I got this one for a really good price from a buddy of mine, Jared, from Jared Loves to Draw. And he decided he would prefer a palette like this that didn't have the dished wells. He wanted something that was just flat on all of these surfaces, so he put his up for sale, and I bought it from him. So he sold it for a great price, and thanks again, Jared. I really appreciate that. Now I'm going to go over the pros and cons of a little box like this, the Roberson Style box. One of the pros I've already mentioned is that these are made of brass, solid brass throughout. And the benefit of that is that brass will not rust. It does not contain iron like a lot of other metals, which can cause them to rust. And so brass will never rust, but it can tarnish. And that's really not an issue with something like this that's fully painted. I love the engineering on these. I think that that's another plus for these Roberson Style boxes. You can see how small it is when it's closed up and in my hands. When it's open, and it closes up so tightly and so neatly. But when you open it, there's a lot of mixing space. You know, you've got two big wells here. You've got the edges around the wells for small mixing. You've got two more wells up in this area. You've got two flat areas here and here for drier mixes. So it's really kind of a neat thing in that it folds up to a very portable size, but it also has a lot of mixing space for like some of the other bigger palettes that don't fold up so small. Another thing that's a plus for these Roberson Style palettes right now currently is that since they're handcrafted and they're made by individuals, you can usually customize them. You can get them with just about any color you like on the outside. You can get them with dished out areas here and here, like in the flat areas. You can do all sorts of things. You could do, have them make you a color well block here, and these come out. I'll show you. I think I did already, but these come out, and you could have them make you one that holds more colors if you wanted to. And speaking about these wells, that's another pro, is that these wells hold a lot of color. I mean, these hold more paint than any other portable palette that I've seen. It's definitely more than a full pan worth of paint. I would say you could probably get double the quantity of a full pan in each one of these little wells. And that's another plus. You know, with this coming out, you could buy a second one of these trays, and the makers of these usually do offer them right on their websites. So you could have a selection of colors that, say, you use in the studio, and maybe your color palette is a little different when you go out plein air painting. And so you could have a separate one of these that you could switch in and out with a different set of colors. So I think that's a real nice plus with these. Another thing is that with the amount of mixing space here you have, this works great both out in the field and also in the studio. Now I use my Holbein 1000 in the studio, but if I wanted to, this would serve just fine. You know, with the finger ring on here, you can hand hold it, you know, and use a brush. Let's see. You know, you can use a brush out in the field, or because I've installed these little silicone sticky feet onto here, I can also rest it on a table and use it that way. You know, if I've got my painting off to one side, this works just great sitting on a table. So it kind of can pull double duty. The other plus that I think these have, and this is kind of an odd one, is that I kind of think of it as like an heirloom. This thing will probably outlast me, I'm guessing. And I kind of joke with my wife that that when I go, they can just cremate me and they can just bury me in this thing. But I doubt that's going to happen. Let's see here. Now I'd like to go over the cons, and there are some cons with something like this. The first thing is the price. Since these are handmade, they can get up into, US dollars. They get up into, 300, 400, even $600, and maybe even higher, because they are handcrafted and because they take so much work to build each one. So that's definitely a downside. Another thing, and it's not a problem for me. I'm kind of sturdily built, but they're kind of heavy. And this brass, one from Brass Palette India, I believe is made with heavier gauge brass than a lot of the other ones that are made. So this one, when it's fully loaded with paint and everything, comes in at 1.5 pounds or 688 grams. And that hasn't been an issue for me. I actually had this out in the field painting, and I held it in my left hand for 2 hours straight without even thinking about it. It didn't bother me at all. So, but it is weightier than other palettes, like a Holbein or something like that. Another con on these is, since they are handcrafted and made one by artisans by hand, there's almost always a wait time. I think currently Brass Palette India's wait time is 2 or 3 months out. When you get into some of the other people, it could be up to a year or longer. So this is something you kind of plan for, and something that that you may have to wait for if you really want one. So that's kind of a con. Now there is also, and this is kind of a weird con, but I've noticed on online forums and even the couple of unboxings on YouTube, I've noticed a lot of negative comments from people where they'll say something like, why do you need a palette that's so expensive when, a $10 plastic one does the same job? And I get that, and I understand that, but you have to be aware, like if you have one of these and you're showing it, you might get some flack for owning it. And I've noticed that in a few cases. Is that something that should deter you from getting one if you really want one? Of course not. But there is that. There is a tendency to hide it away. At least on my part. I kind of was debating whether to even do this review. And a friend of mine on Instagram and Facebook, Jackie Tan, kind of talked me into doing this review. She made a point that there weren't many reviews or really much on these Roberson palettes on YouTube at all. So thanks, Jackie. She also owns a palette from Brass Palette India that she loves. So, couple more cons with this. Because it's so expensive, because it's handcrafted, because it's kind of a, it's like a heirloom special item. For me, and probably a lot of people, there may be a tendency not to use it because it is so kind of quote unquote precious, and because it was so expensive. Now I got mine for a really good price, and I got it used. So it had a few little chips and things on it, and so I was kind of glad about that. It was kind of broken in and not something that I was worried about using. But if I had bought this pristine brand new, I think I would have a hesitancy to actually use it because it is so nice and so expensive. So that can be a downside for some people. The last thing, and this is an issue that all palettes across the board have, is that it does tend to stain. This is something that, like I said, happens in most palettes, especially with the phthalos, like phthalo blue and phthalo green. But I just use my Masters brush cleaner soap. And I think I'll pop a photo of that in here because I did show it in a previous video, but I don't have it on hand now. But I use that soap, and that just cleans it right up. So. Oh, one thing I should point out, I've added this little plaque here, and I'll insert a photo. It's one of my favorite quotes from Edward Hopper, and it says, "If you could say it in words, there would be no reason to paint." And so I've added that in there just kind of as a reminder to myself on one of the reasons I paint, one of the reasons I like to create art. Okay, now just real quick, there are several companies making these. Like I said, this is from Brass Palette India. They make quite a few different models of brass palettes. They have tabletop ones, they have smaller, more portable ones, just a full assortment of palettes that are made, and they have a page on Facebook that I'll link you to in the description of the video. The Venu, the guy that makes these palettes, is a great guy. I've enjoyed talking back and forth with him about different things, and so really enjoy the palettes and that company, Brass Palette India. Other companies making these would be like Craig Young. He was the one quite a few years ago that initially started hand making these again when people wanted them. So that's Craig Young. A company called Little Brass Box makes these, and another company called Ibaco makes these. And I might be missing somebody, but those are the main ones that I'm aware of. Now, real quick before I finish up here, I thought I'd explain why I own one of these. You know, I never had really thought that I would own one of these. I had brought it up to my wife that I would like to have one, and she kind of, you know, it is kind of insane on some level to spend that much money on a palette when a cheaper palette will do the same job. So I'd kind of resigned myself to not getting one of these. But when my friend Jared put one up for sale at such a great price, I did jump on it. And he, you know, in talking with Jared, there were some things that he brought up that I hadn't really thought of. And he made a good point. Like, you know, if a musician, you know, an accomplished musician that's dedicated their lives to music, say, you know, spends thousands of dollars on their instrument, you know, a violin or a trumpet or whatever it is that they use for their art, nobody bats an eye, you know. But if a watercolorist spends that much money, or, you know, a few $100s on something that they use day to day and every day, people tend to react to that differently. And I just thought that was a good point. I mean, it's kind of the same sort of thing in a way. One of the things I like about this for myself is when I use it, it kind of reminds me of the importance of watercolor in my life, my passion for painting in watercolor. Whenever I use this, it kind of reminds me of that. It reminds me of my dedication to this. It reminds me of how important it is to me. And so I wanted something special, you know, to go with my passion for watercolor. Another reason is that I like gadgety things. I like things, you know, I love how these are engineered. I love things that fold up. It's kind of like one of those old Transformer toys or something, you know. It's just so neat and fun to play with, you know, as an object. So I really like that about it. And lastly, it kind of represents a new beginning for me. 3 or 4 years ago, I had reached a point with my painting. I was an illustrator, and I have to say, I had reached a point where I didn't know if I was going to pick up a brush and paint again, ever, for the rest of my life. And what scared me was that I didn't care either. I didn't care if I ever painted again. And so a couple of years ago, I started to notice people were painting outdoors and making watercolor kits that could take with them to different places and paint wherever they were, and that got me excited. And so in a way, this represents kind of a new beginning for me. This represents this new leg of my watercolor journey, and yeah, so it's just kind of nice to have that as a reminder. Now, I love this box so much that I have ordered a smaller box. Now, this one is called the Aqua Pool. That's the model name with Brass Palette India. This is a Roberson Style box, but with Brass Palette India, this is called the Aqua Pool model. Now, I've also ordered an Aqua Mini, and I'll put a picture of that up on screen there. But I just love the bigger Roberson Style box so much, I wanted to order kind of a smaller version of that box for my smaller kit. And so I did that, and that will be arriving in August sometime. So I will also do a review on that when I get it. So thanks for tuning in. I hope this hasn't been too long. And take care, everyone. I'll see you next time.